Forward. All right. Welcome everybody to our club sesh. We've got one of the top experts in our industry. Most of you, I hope, I don't know how you would not know Chad. Chad is one of the Retireaholics, the most amazing group of, I think, information people putting out information in our world, right? So you've got your own take with the show on Thursday nights. And if you're not catching that, I encourage you to do so because it's a blast. Chad's been a huge help to me. So I want to, before we introduce Chad and get him talking about control groups, Chad, I started working with him with plans that I do recently, and it's been amazing. So Chad, thank you. I know we've got Shannon here and a few others. We've tried to do the same. I like to test different TPAs and kind of learn their way they do things and kind of make good connections with my TPAs and my clients so that they all kind of mesh well together. So I know sometimes the vision for TPAs is to have one, the advisor uses one group, and sometimes it doesn't work out. So, but Chad, I'm just always blown away his knowledge and his ability to simplify things. And when I have had calls with him and clients, like it's been so clear and easy for them to understand. So it's been really useful. So today I want to talk about this topic that keeps coming up, and I hope most of you, I put a poll out there on here that you can answer. I'm curious how the control group and affiliate service group questions have been coming up, and I want to dive into that. But Chad, welcome. Go ahead and say hi and introduce yourself if people don't know you.
It's kind of nice to see some videos on, like Jeremy jumping into the show on Thursday nights, but I never get to see a video feed of you, so it's good to see you, buddy. I think Jake probably alluded to it. We should have some fun this morning. It's a complicated topic that I definitely don't want to make you experts in. In fact, I don't want to be an expert in it. What always comes to my mind when advisors ask me about control groups is the Tommy Boy quote. Like I can take a look at a T-bone by shoving my head up a bull's butt, or I can take the butcher's word for it. The same thing goes with control groups. Like I can guide you guys and make you dangerous in how to have the conversation, which is what we're going to do today. But the truth is, none of us on this call should be making the decision of whether or not these organizations are part of the controlled group. Unless it's really black and white, typically you want an ERISA attorney to make those determinations. You want legal counsel to make those determinations. But I have found over a decade plus of doing this good, clean ways of carrying that conversation so a client can understand what you're getting after. And you can decide if there's a need to go to that next level of getting an attorney involved.
Yeah.
But it's a boring conversation. So when Jake asked for it, I'm like, really? This is what we're going to spend time talking about?
Well, what I want to dive into from our perspective, we've got a mix, mostly advisors and a couple of TPA people here, but I want to know, how do we steer the right conversation? Because I feel like the control group conversation is going to be different every time, right? Because businesses change. I've recently been working with more and more dentists, and I find like every single time this is coming up, and it's tough for me because I don't know all the parameters sometimes, and so I stick within my head like the 80% rule, right? I'm just kind of like, that's where I start, but I don't want to lose the sale. I want to get them through the door. So help us. Maybe what are some things, like if we're coming across these situations, what are the questions we should ask? How do we not get ourselves over promising something that maybe isn't the case with a control group or affiliated, and help us not miss that opportunity because we don't show we know enough.
Yeah, and it depends on where you're at in the consulting process, right? If you're early on, the last thing you want to do is create so much dust in the conversation that you lose the sale because they feel you're complicated to talk to. Mm-hmm. And I've seen advisors do that. They get in and the client says, well, I want you in here to talk about employee education. And what do? They dig into administration, and they come up with areas of pain points for the client that they don't know exist. And now that loses them the sale, Jake. So your comment of you don't want to lose the sale, so you want to be armed with control group conversation, I think is important, but just make sure we're using it at the right point and at the right time. Now, yeah. Shannon mentioned in the chat, the number one question to ask is, do you have ownership in any other companies? Do you have any other related businesses? And that question should spark some significant conversation. And as Jake alluded to, I like to oversimplify this stuff. I really, really do. And if I need to get into the weeds, we will. But I oversimplify with most clients. And if they tell me they have a related company, I say it's kind of a three-part test. I'm going to look at if you have common ownership. I'm going to check if you have any affiliated service companies. And then I'm going to determine if you have a management service organization. I usually loosely use the term controlled group to cover all three of those, even though that's not the actual ERISA definition of it. But clients seem to understand that. And what we're trying to understand as the TPA from the client is, do you have any related entities that we need to consider? And what does that mean? Because most advisors don't quite understand it. If you have a related entity, we need to consider it for plan testing sake. That doesn't mean we have to offer them the plan. It doesn't mean we have to offer them the exact same benefits. We might have to do those things, but we need to consider that other company when looking at the overall fiduciary status of your plan. And so if I walk through those three tests loosely, I start with ownership, which we'll get into in a second. I move into any affiliated organizations, and then I touch, which is so very rare today, in management service organizations, and try to figure out, that's the easiest of them, if there's any relation there. And then from there, I'll tell them, like, hey, it's black and white to me. You have 90% common ownership. You're part of a controlled group. We need to take into account that other business. And here's what I need to do to determine what happens. Now, I know you want this to be a little Q&A, so I'll slow down in a second and we'll get into the nitty gritty. But remember, what we're trying to uncover is, are the businesses related? And if so, what's the objective that the client is wanting to accomplish here? Because more often than not, I find out the business is related and they had intended to offer the plan to those employees anyways. They just didn't know they needed to in this scenario. Or the more common scenario is a merger and acquisition. And now they're thinking, well, this business is separate from us because we're A company and they're B company. We've entered into an agreement to buy them, and I can keep them separate. But now, truthfully, they've become part of this controlled group with them. So those are the two most common scenarios that pop up. And more often than not, they want to adopt the plan. They want to offer it to the employees. And usually that's going to be the end result, unless we're a larger organization and we can still pass coverage and carve them out, which we'll get into in a minute.
And a quick follow up to that, like, sometimes we'll find like it would be better if they're affiliated. So I have a bunch of group of doctors that we're not affiliated right now. They had an ERISA attorney review all of it. They're getting close to that. And that percentage always sticks in my mind of like 15% of shared resources is kind of like.
Hold on one second. I didn't hear you.
And there's Shannon. And I don't know if that's right or wrong, but like making the determination of affiliate service group is not an easy thing from what my experience.
So no, it's not. And let's walk through those three parts real quick.
Yeah.
So if I'm sitting in a meeting and I ask the question, do you have any related entities? And I know some of our smart TPAs on here are already going, well, do you have any under the age of 21 children and owner attribution for the kids, and the parents have more than 50%? The advisors in this group don't need to know that shit. You don't. You need to be armed with the basics, and then after you have that meeting, you leverage folks like Shannon, Jeremy, myself, and you dive deeper into it. But the way I typically handle the conversations, do you have any related businesses? When they say yes, I'll say, okay, are you an owner of that business? And we're trying to dive into the common ownership as the first area, because it's very black and white. That one's easy to understand. Typically, I make it this loose when I have this conversation. I say, do you have 80% or greater ownership in any other business? So I need to determine if the ownership alignment of your current business has greater than or equal to or greater than 80% in any other entity. And it's fairly simple to uncover. Now, you get into some complicated situations where you have multiple doctors owning portions of practices, and you have children in the business where they attribute parents' ownership. And that can get a little more complicated. But typically, if you start with that simple question, 80% or greater common ownership, it's going to get you through 50 to 60% of the conversations around controlled groups and controlling interests. If there is a situation, thanks, Jake. Look at this, launching polls while we go through. If you're in a situation where it's greater than 80% common ownership, you're looking at a controlled group. You're looking at the second business and saying, in all likelihood, we're going to have that group be a part of the primary plan as an adopting employer. And what we need to do from there is determine if they want that business to be a part of it. If they don't, can we independently pass coverage testing and allow that business to be carved out? And I know that's getting into the nitty gritty. I want to focus in on the first step, which is 80% or greater common ownership. And again, Jake, you tell me how granular you want to get. Because if we go into brother sister and we look at 50% controlling interest, I think I lose people. And that's not a conversation I have with clients very often. Usually it's not needed. It's 80% or greater common ownership is the first line of questioning that you should be sticking to.
Yeah. So if we get to that point, we say, all right, what's the ownership structure? And then we find that it is 80%. And let's say it's like two different businesses, but they own, and they're not really sharing anything else, but they're owned by the same two people. Then what? Then bring you in the conversation. Like, what's the next step that really should be the best thing so that we don't mess up winning that client?
Yeah, you have to get a little bit more granular. If it is 80%, then you want to determine the client's objectives. Do they want to offer the plan to that other group? Because that's what we're trying to cover, right? If we just wanted to give the exact same benefits to the other group, then this is kind of a moot point. But often the business is saying, no, this other dental practice that I have a minority in their term, minority ownership is one we always get. I'm 100% owner of my practice, but I have a minority ownership in this other dental practice, 30 miles away. And I don't want to offer them the plan because I want to set up a nice lucrative profit sharing cash balance plan here and not give those benefits to that group over there. If that's the answer, now we need to get a little bit deeper and say, who are we trying to cover at each entity? What's the breakup of highly compensated employees versus non-highly compensated employees? And can we pass independent coverage so that we can leave these businesses apart from a testing perspective? Or if we can't, which in closely held practices, professional firms is almost always the case, we've got to bring them together and we likely have to offer the benefits that we're giving to company A to company B. The term I always use, and I like to oversimplify, as I mentioned, the term I always use is equal rights, benefits, and features. Remember why these rules exist, right? And when a client hears that, they go, equal rights. Okay, those employees 30 miles away deserve to have the same plan that my employees do when I'm an owner of both of these businesses. Usually it starts to ring for them as to why these rules exist. And I give them an example. Say, look, if I wanted to start PDC 2.0 and JD and I set up that entity, and we were the sole owners over there, we put myself and him only over there, we set up a nice lucrative cash balance 401k plan there. We can't not offer it to all the employees of our primary company. We're clearly setting up PDC 2.0 in an effort to keep the benefits away from the primary business.
But if we
and that usually starts to ring for people.
Yeah, but if you set up PDC2 in Utah and 50-50 with me, so we don't have 80% common ownership, can we offer better benefits to that group here in Utah separate?
That's where you often have to get into the next two steps that I loosely used as an affiliated service group or a management service organization. If we set up PDC 2.0 and our main man Jake is a 50% owner and JD and I are each 25% owners, we're not going to hit the threshold number to be a controlled group by ownership in that scenario. What we are going to have to look at is where is our revenue being generated? If, for example, PDC 2.0 is getting its revenue from services that we're delivering to PDC, we're bringing those clients over, they're similar clients, that's how we're generating our revenue, then in all likelihood, we're both service organizations, we're going to be considered related. And even though we don't have enough common ownership, we're still going to have to be pulled together for testing sake.
All right.
That's where, and Jeremy mentioned, like ASGs are the hardest ones, affiliated services group. That's where the stuff gets dirty. And I'm telling you, if I'm sitting in that meeting and I'm having the conversation around common ownership, which usually covers the vast majority of the situations y'all will get yourselves in, the next step, that affiliated services group step, you really want to talk holistically about the services that are being delivered and generated by the two entities, the amount of revenue that's being derived from the two service entities. And then from there, quite honestly, I'm going back to the drawing board and I'm sitting with our ERISA counsel and I'm going to say, here's what I'm seeing. They're generating 17% of their gross revenue from the payroll service that they're delivering to the 5 doctor firms. So is this, in this scenario, going to be an affiliated services group? It gets too deep to try to handle that in an initial meeting where you don't have specific details leading in.
Right. So you'd have to bring in someone, a TPA, to help you in that situation.
I mean, I'd like to say yes, you should bring us in, but
does that drive you crazy? Like, are you going to risk attorneys for the client? Is that something the client's splitting the bill for? Like, tell us more on, like, what are the things that drive TPAs crazy in these situations that you wish we did better?
Gather the information is the key one. Quite often we find out too late that they had told the advisor in the initial meeting that there was some significant common ownership, or that their spouse, which is something Shannon mentioned in the chat bar, that their spouse has a company. That's something that we haven't gotten into yet. But what the thing that drives me crazy is when they come back and they say, well, the common ownership is 75%. And when we jump back in there, we find out that it is the husband that owns the other 25%, but they kept separate last names. So we couldn't tell with the information that was given because nobody told us that it was the husband. So it's a lack of information that usually leads to the headache. What advisors need to do to be dangerous, correct me if I'm wrong. I've built an entire practice on trying to show a client that they can trust us. I'm not going to be able to answer every question. I'm not. But if you can trust me that I'm going to get you the right answer, then 9 out of 10 times we're going to be doing business together. And so from an advisor's perspective, you do not need to answer these questions. You need to be armed to talk about 80% or greater common ownership. You need to be armed to talk about attribution of ownership between parents, kids, spouse. You need to understand kind of that there's 3 areas. There's common ownership, there's affiliated services, and there's a management service organization. But if you understand that, call it 30,000 foot level of these topics, you're never going to get yourself in trouble, and the client's going to find you super valuable.
Which, okay, so this is a conversation I had with Shannon a while back of when you look at a startup plan, the concept is, well, that startup plan is really simple and easy. You just throw them onto a bundled platform, keep costs low. But the issue I think there is these startup plans you don't know. The client doesn't know. They've never been through this. So they could have a complex situation, and having TPA involved could really prevent some huge headaches of just not knowing certain things, right? The questions to ask, whereas us and a bundle provider probably aren't going to get to the bottom level of the granular level you need to be.
Well, I have 3 thoughts. Number one, bundled has a fit, but just because it's a small startup doesn't mean it's any cheaper to go bundled, or it's necessarily the right way to go either. Right. But bundled certainly does have a fit. Secondarily, I would like to think that the bundled providers are smart enough with a CYA type of setup that they have to ask these questions as part of their onboarding. It may not have come up by the wholesaler in the selling process, which it would when you have a TPA in the room, but at least in the implementation, their Q&A, their data that they collect from the client, sure as hell better ask if there's any common ownership or any other businesses that they're affiliated with, or if their spouse has a business. Those questions have to be part of the onboarding process. If it's not, then I'm terrified for our bundled partners. And then I'll go a little bit further. With a TPA involved, often the thought is from folks, and Jake, I'll throw you under the bus. Granted, you have a niche where you go after clients that need a TPA, but folks like you that are heavy hitters that are doing a lot of K business, they often don't want to create complexity. And so what I run into more often than not, and I know some of the other TPAs on the call do this as well, we get in trouble for asking these questions. And that's not a joke. Like, advisors will turn to us and be like, why are you overcomplicating the sales process? And I tell them, you've brought me in here to make sure that your client is safe. Like, I'm going to make sure that if we're implementing a plan or we're taking over a plan, we've dotted I's and crossed the T's, so that in 3 years from now, when a competitor of yours comes in and is thorough, that your client's not going through the VCP to fix all that stuff. Yeah. And we've gotten in trouble for that. We honestly have. Advisors have been frustrated when we go through an implementation process and our implementation person uncovers that a company was adopting that plan and they're not part of a controlled group. Now we have an open MEP, and now that creates its complications. But that's what you want. You want to protect the client and show the value. That can dirty up the sales process if you get into it too early.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess make sure you get everything kind of rolling forward instead of having the discussion up front and getting really detailed and like really kind of scare them. You always want to keep them moving forward. And so if it's going to slow down that process because you're getting too in the weeds, that's, I think, a mistake I made early on, right? Like I'd come in with all sorts of things and try to blow the whole plan up and change all the stuff. And like, that's too much. So
You're using a technique that TPA has used for 30 years. Like we've been around for 46 years. When I started in this with Paul, JD's dad, um, we consulted in a way that advisors and clients would know we were the smartest ERISA nerd in the room, right? Like that was the goal. That, oh shit, we've got to work with Chad's team because he's so smart. He's going to figure all this out for us. I have learned over the years and completely disagree with that way now. And I think advisors that step in and say, I'm the smartest guy, let me uncover if you have testing issues or if you need to go through the VCP or if you're part of a control group. That's very rarely what a client wants to hear. A client wants to be sold on you, your value, that you're going to bring to them, to their employees. And then in the implementation process, we get into these deeper questions and we uncover this. And there will be times, Jake, where we got to backtrack. I mean, you've seen it. You and I just had a live case where I had to backtrack because the prior TPA had an adopting employer on the plan that should not have been part of the plan. I didn't uncover that in the sales process. And it's probably a good thing because it would have slowed everything down. But as soon as we got to implementation, we addressed it. And now we're in the process of fixing it. But those little things, you dig in too deep in the sales process and you're selling away from your value, which is you and not the nerd that's up here.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of trust on the advisor side. You've got to let your TPA partner really do what they need to do, right? And have enough confidence in yourself that they are going to be more knowledgeable on this than you are. And so when I get hit with these questions, the problem I run into is I'm not going to answer all of them. It's like I was in a big presentation with all these dentists and I had one guy grilling me on basically he's got 4 different offices and different owners in here. And I said, look, like we need to sit down. We need to map it out and we need to bring in our administration team to look at this and really determine because you've got some complexities there. And he was fine with that. But like, if I was trying to answer the question right there, because I'm too, like, I got to be the guy that's giving all the answers, then he's probably not going to get the right answer. And that's not going to lead to a good start to the relationship.
Right.
So that's a big deal, is just knowing your TPA partners and when to bring them in the conversation and do it early as you can.
And what I heard from you there, Jay, which I think is important for everybody else to hear, you don't have to answer the question. You need to be able to show the knowledge that you know what you're talking about and you're going to get the answer to the question. And as I mentioned before, and Jeremy said earlier in the chat bar, often affiliated service groups, those are dirty ones. Those are hard to determine on the fly. Ownership control groups, common ownership controlling interest, those are much easier because it's pretty black and white where the ownership aligns, depending on how many businesses you have. But if you're talking to that client, Jake, and he's like, well, I've got 4 different practices and I've got 58% ownership in this one and 29 in that one and 100% in this one. And then my partner who's on this one has the other 28% over there. And then he's got 75% over here. You really want to pull out your pad and paper and figure that out right there? No, you want to say, okay, look, here's why this rule exists, which I mentioned earlier. The IRS, the Department of Labor, wants to make sure that you're not discriminating against any of the businesses or their employees that you have common ownership in. And I always say this, even though this is not accurate, Shannon, Jeremy, those of you on here, I always say determining if you're a related entity is kind of a 3-part test. And I loop controlled group as part of this 3-part test. Common ownership, and I'll use loose terms. I'll say, look, if you have a common ownership that is 80% or greater with any of these other entities, and that is you and your partners or you and your spouse, then we need to take them into consideration. And so 80% is our threshold. And then I'll usually throw off a couple things for number 2 is an affiliated services group. And that's if one business is generating a majority of its income from doing services for the other business. And then a management service organization, if you went ahead and you aligned your management team at one business and they exercised rights over operations of that other business, you're likely going to fall into a management service organization. Either of these 3 things hold true. What that means is we have to take this other business into consideration when we look at your plan. Doesn't mean we have to include them yet, but it means we have to take them into consideration, and now we have to run coverage testing and see what we can do from there. If you can cover those 3 with that level of confidence, and then let them know I need the information so I can sit down and actually run the look, the dive, the insight into whether or not you're related, they're going to fall in love with you. Nobody else, no other advisors are having that conversation unless they've got one of us nerds in the room.
Which goes back to knowing your target client, and identifying your client will let you know that this is something I run into a lot because dentists and doctors do this a lot. And even to add even more complexity to this, when you add a cash balance plan, I mean, I've ran into problems with certain platforms and things. I shouldn't name names, but where you need to have the cash balance administration done with the same TPA. Like I don't know how you can like bundle the
Yep.
401k and then cash balance over here. Like you're gonna have a nightmare. It is worth setting the right foundation up all in one place, all administration in one place. So if you're gonna go down that cash balance road or ESOP or whatever, you gotta have the right TPA doing all of it. Would you agree with that, Chad?
Yeah, and not to burn any bridges for someone who thinks differently than I do, but if you as a TPA shop are willing to take on the cash balance when not doing the administration on the 401k, I can't trust you. I mean, that the dog wags the tail in that scenario. The DC plan is going to have huge implications on how the cash balance operates. And I've ran into it over my time period where some TPAs are like, well, we'll just take the data that we get from ADP. Go ahead and keep your 401k at ADP, and we'll take that data and we'll go ahead and run the cash balance. Yeah, you could do that, but in all likelihood, that ADP document's not going to be flexible enough, nor are you going to be able to give them the advice of, hey, Chad terminated mid-year and his income was super low. So let's give him a higher contribution, which would then pull down what we have to give to all other 30 employees. Like you can't do that back and forth unless you're doing the administration on both plans. So if I hear a TPA is willing to do one and not the other, I kind of lose that. They lose a little credibility for me in that way.
Yeah, I would agree. I've ran into problems like that. So definitely don't go down that route. It's funny, I just picked up a plan that has that situation that I'm hoping we can work our way through getting all in one place, but it's a step, it's a process. So just, yeah, try to avoid those pitfalls by having too many hands in the whole situation, too many hands in the pot. So,
hey,
yeah, go ahead.
I know you probably have other stuff on the controlled group topic. I'll just make a couple of quick other points that I think advisors should be dangerous in having the conversation. Often your clients will not be part of a controlled group or any type of related entity until they acquire another practice. And this happens all the time, right? The client tells you after they've already entered into a purchase agreement with another practice somewhere, and now they're going to be 85% owners of this other dental shop, and you're behind in helping them because they've already gone through with this transaction. That's where control groups come into play more often than not, quite honestly. And the conversation that advisors should be prepared to have is determining if that acquisition of that entity was an asset acquisition or a stock acquisition. Those have two different timelines and two different implications as to what needs to happen and how we look at that second entity. And if you can ask that question, and they should know, although many don't, because it should have been part of the conversation when the purchase agreement was set up. In the dental world, it's often an asset acquisition, like you're getting the physical tools inside the office and the employees, but that entity itself, you're not acquiring all the stock of that entity or the interest of that entity. But in other lines of work, it ends up being a full stock purchase sometimes, and all the employees then come over as a whole with that stock. And you have a window to make sure that you align the benefits with them before you get yourself into trouble as a business. That's another area that I think advisors should be comfortable talking and asking the question, what type of sale was this? And when did it take place? When did it close? You ask those two questions, it should get you going down the right path.
Which leads to, I mean, as advisors, we should know our clients well enough that if they're going to do acquisitions like that, hopefully they keep you in the loop, because you're not just the 401k salesperson, you're a partner to their business. And having that mindset of really helping them understand you want to help them accomplish goals using the 401k instead of selling them a 401k, then you're going to be aware they're going to keep you in the loop on those kind of big transactions, because you need to know that.
Yeah.
So
and Matt says it perfectly. Like we've got to be in tune with our clients. We need to be business consultants, not just 401k consultants, which is exactly what you said, Jake. But I will tell you, quite often clients are trying to keep that information from the employees and make sure that it's just that business owner or their friend that they're buying the practice or joining forces with. No. And it's a precedent that I set and we set with every client that we onboard, is that if you're going through any big business changes like this, loop us in. Please loop us in, and loop us in immediately, because the sooner that we know, the better we can advise you before you get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, let's open it up. What questions does everybody have? We got Chad here.
I've got a quick question here. So I lost a few opportunities late last year because we slowed the process down because I was like, hey, I think this is an affiliated service group and we need to get legal counsel involved. And so me and the advisor are talking to the plan sponsor. And meanwhile, another advisor record keeper comes in the door and is like, well, we'll set the plan up. We don't have to go through all of this. And I'm trying to explain, like, I'm not trying to make this difficult. I'm trying to make sure you guys are covered and we don't run into a big issue down the road. But they just wanted quick, easy, bing, bang, boom. And so we lost the opportunities. And the back of my mind, I'm like, is that really the client that I want at the end of the day? I don't know. But also, like, what are some things that I can be doing to better, more eloquently let them know that, like, they really need to stop and take the time to do this to make sure that 3 years down the road, like Shannon says, they're not with you guys and we've got a big VCP all of a sudden that they're on the hook for.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, right, Jeremy? It is tough. It is tough. And as I mentioned, as a firm, we've been known to be over detailed on the implementation and the conversion side of things, and then the ongoing administration, which has gotten us into trouble at times, just like you're describing. The saying, I like to use analogies if you couldn't tell. The saying I always use with these kind of businesses is an ounce of prevention is going to be worth a pound of cure. You're going to want me to spend this little bit of extra time right now to make sure that you're not getting hit with a $30,000 IRS fine and going through the VCP in the future to try to correct the mistakes that have been made because we covered our eyes and walked into something that sounded better and shinier. But it is a balancing act, and the way I would tell you I've handled that is, number one, I try to be as easy to understand in this conversation as possible. If they don't know what you're doing or why you're trying to ask the questions that you're asking, what the outcome is that you're trying to get to, then they're going to be hesitant to share and they're going to look for something that's easier. And so often when I'm having the conversation around control groups or ASGs, I'm telling them ounce prevention with a pound of cure, and I'm trying to let them know the end result of what I'm getting at, which is, do we need to have this other business as a part of your existing 401k plan? Or can we leave them separate, which is probably what they already have in that scenario. And if I tell them what the end result is I'm trying to get at, I explain it to them in a way they can understand. And then the question was asked by Jake earlier, and I avoided it, but I'll come out and say it now. I usually don't have to charge the client for the ERISA consultation because we have counsel that we have retained, but also we've got some really wonderful relationships with many ERISA attorneys that tune into the show and are kind enough to help us. And so often I reach out to them, I get real quick guidance. It's not a legal opinion at this point. They haven't engaged the ERISA attorney. It's not a legal opinion. If I feel that the information we've gotten is enough, I'll take it back to the client. If I feel that we need to get a legal opinion written, then I'm going to tell the client, now we need to engage an ERISA attorney and really get an opinion written so that we feel comfortable about the steps we're taking. But the key, you're right, man. Everybody wants easy.
Yeah, that's a good distinction because they're the ones that have to take on the risk. So if you can explain to them in a way that, all right, this is the situation, we get an answer. But if you really want it concrete, like written opinion, that's going to cost some money. So I have clients that do both. So it really just depends on the level of comfort that they have.
Yeah. And there's been times too, not that everybody wants to hear the airing of dirty laundry. There's been times too where I tell a client, I think you should get an ERISA opinion. But if you're going to go the conservative route, make this group a part of your plan, give them the same benefits, allow them to be a part of it. Worst case scenario, we've got to go back and push you to a MEP. Like if at some point in the future, because what they don't want you to do is withhold benefits, right? They do not want you to stop benefits from getting these people. They're okay if you give them benefits, especially now with some of the loosening of the MEP rules, but they don't want you to stop them from getting benefits.
Right. Nice. What other questions? Anybody? I can unmute you. This has been awesome, Chad.
Told you it's a dry topic, Jake.
No, I think it's good. I think definitely the follow-up to this is, when you get these, definitely lean on your TPAs to help you and don't overcomplicate it, but know the right questions. And when you know there is more than one entity involved and there's kind of complexity, don't delay it. Move forward as quick as you can to bring the right partner to help you.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit of commentary as we kind of conclude here. Even if I spent 2 hours discussing this with you all, we're still only going to be scratching the surface. There are some real small areas. The one that I run into quite often in California, because of the emergence of small startup businesses and law firms heavy out here, that often doctor practices have surgery centers. Surgery centers have their own little area that you don't even need significant common ownership for it to be part of a controlled group. And in that, you don't have to always offer the same benefits. You have to offer sufficiently generous benefits. You get into husband and wife common ownership. The example I often give is Mark Zuckerberg was a sole owner of Facebook, and his wife had a hair salon. Does his wife's hair salon need to offer the same benefits as Facebook? Like, there are some areas that create gray conversations. It's not that black and white. And even someone who's been doing it as long as I have, specific into the nerdy stuff, it's not. And Jeremy, you said it, especially in the ASG side, it's not an easy conversation. And so you just need to be armed to cover that 30,000 foot level, and then bring the folks on or in that you feel real comfortable can get the client a black and white answer.
I've got one more question for you, Chad. Have you run into any issues with like trusts where, companies are owned within, a trust, and trying to figure out how that all sorts out? I just ran into one.
Trying to unhook it from my car.
Yeah, I have. And it gets kind of dirty. The other dirty area that's the same kind of conversation is when you're talking about stock that's not vested yet. Up here in NorCal, you have a lot of businesses that do stock options for employees, and the employees are getting them, but they're not vested. And do you count that as actual ownership when doing HCE and key employee determination? So yes, I have ran into it. It gets dirty. I will tell you 100 out of 100 times, I'm bringing in counsel to have those discussions when you have a trust that has multiple owners below it, multiple beneficiaries below the trust. That's it'll be 11 years on the 8th that I've been doing this. In the 11 years, that's probably come up 5 or 6 times, where I have a significant ownership built in a trust.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the driver behind like organizational structure and entity structure, you got your attorneys and your CPAs, and then we're like the bottom of the list, yet it can impact pretty significantly if it's done wrong from our side, but we don't really have a voice at the table. So we always have to adapt to what's been done. But
one of the, I'm sure, our other TPA friends here do the same thing. One of the areas that we request when bringing on a client is who their CPA is, the contact information, and do we have a green light to include them in communications? And we do that because often the CPA knows more than we do about the client's goals. Are they wanting to fully fund, or are they acquiring a new business? Is it their goal to acquire a bunch of new practices? So we're pulling back the profit sharing allocations. And so we don't always communicate with the CPAs, but we want to have that open line. And hopefully they'll keep us involved, Jake, as well, as you're saying. Their attorneys, their CPAs, they keep us, meaning the advisor and the TPA, involved in those discussions.
Yeah, I always jump on that opportunity. If I can meet their CPA, I mean, that's a chance for me, one, to get some attention from a CPA and show them my value by quarterbacking that whole conversation, which hopefully will open some other doors of other clients so they don't see that opportunity, where they don't get that help. So I always love meeting the CPA. I had a CPA doing work for one of my bigger medical practices, and he called me and had no idea what a cash balance plan was. Like, and he was doing, and this is not a small firm. I was blown away by that. So you just never know when you talk to a CPA what kind of level of experience they have, but the opportunities they can open up for you can be pretty massive. So yeah, for sure.
And when you get in tight with a CPA, they quite often are the trusted business coach, like Matt was saying a moment ago. Like, the CPA is usually a highly valued resource for a client. And when you get in good with them, you're clean now. I just ran into one the other day where the advisor and the client are on the phone. It's a fairly large controlled group situation. Chatting with them, they said, we're engaging this CPA up in Santa Rosa. And I said, oh, really? Well, tell him I said hi. I said, oh, you know him? I said, yeah, I know most of the Bay Area CPAs because we've been doing this for quite some time. That gave the client so much confidence because they've already vetted the CPA. They've engaged with him now. And now they know that I know him and I'm comfortable enough to say hi to him. Once you get in with those CPAs, it's a very good relationship.
Good point. Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a
Yeah, go
question.
Matt.
Hey, Chad, it's very evident that you've had a lot of reps at the plate, in the 401k space, and your professionalism and your knowledge really comes out. My question for you is, how much personal time do you spend in education, being better at your craft?
I will say it doesn't need to be education for me to get better at my craft. And that was something I mentioned at the very beginning. When you have a lot of plate reps, you get to try different things. I've tried to explain controlled groups in a variety of different ways. I've tried to get into the nitty gritty, like I told you, our firm did, 40, 30, 20, 15 years ago. And as you continue to do these things, as you continue to evolve and see how people react and understand what you're laying down, you refine your craft every time. But I liked the first part of your question. And my answer would be not enough. I do not spend enough time in the education side. Justin, Mark, and I, as of the beginning of this year, break up our calendar, and we have reading time, meditation time, early learning time in the mornings. And then because we're at the desk all the time right now, which gives us the opportunity to really structure our day. And then we have client follow-up, email handling. We have new point of sale, usually afternoon slotted, but we've broken up our days so that we could get better at personal education. And I will tell you, my 3 sources for personal education, number 1 is LinkedIn. You see things that you post, that Jake posts, that Nevin writes. You know how much shit I learned reading what you smart people put out there? And now I need to dig in a little bit deeper and find my personal opinion about some of those topics. But LinkedIn is number 1. It took me, I hate to admit it, but it took me like 6 months to finalize the first round of the QKA. So in terms of diving into other education, I don't set aside enough time for that. And I need to. I think it is absolutely vital to the growth of any professional. And I need to do a better job at it.
Well, just to piggyback on that, Chad, I think that you've evolved to the point that, books and podcasts are great for you, but, and this is important for people that are coming into the space, your team that you've built, those are your coaches, your CPAs, your ERISA attorneys. And so
Absolutely.
I would like to encourage everybody who's watching this to take a note out of your playbook. And, when you're first getting started out, you got to do as much as you can by yourself, but you want to build a big team as quickly as possible of experts, because not only can they help you grow your practice, but Chad, every time I hear you talk, man, like you always have brilliant stuff to say. And it's obvious to me that the people you're hanging around, your consultants, your team, they're a high level. And too many people in this business want to be the Han Solo, one person. And if they just learn how to say, I need help, I don't have the answer to that question, but I'm going to resource my partner, I think that their businesses and their professionalism and their, will all grow. So.
Yeah, I love that. And Jake said it earlier too. As much as I would like many of our advisor partners to say I'm the only TPA they work with, I know it's not true. And I don't want it to be true either. I think in order for you to know the value that we bring, you need to have other partners out there. And I can tell you, like Jake wrote me the other day and said, do you do 409As? And I said, no. Like there are certain things that I don't do that you're going to need a TPA that does. And you need to grow that network. And like you're saying, learn from all those folks, but don't pigeonhole yourself to one product, one TPA, one CPA, one resource, one partner. Grow that network and learn from each other. That's what's so cool about the club, right? Like you have other TPAs that probably know the topic I'm discussing better than I do. You have advisors here that maybe know how to service a 401k plan better than Jake does, but we're all learning from each other, right? That's the only way we're going to continue to further this industry. It was a decade ago, we read a release that the financial advisor is ranked lower on a trust scale than a used car salesman. It was Excel in Vegas, I think, that I heard that at the first time. And I was relatively new in this space. I looked at JD, I'm like, what the hell did you get me into? Like, I'm looked at worse than a used car salesman. And I think by us doing what you guys are doing, we can climb our way out of that. We can be authentic. We can be ourselves. We can go out and be valuable for the people we're trying to service. And we can go beyond just trying to win a plan. Like Jake said, get in deeper, be the business consultant, and be involved in our clients' lives.
Yeah, it's exactly it. Yeah, and the great content you guys put out. I mean, when I get asked like, what do I read? Where do I go get information? Like, I tell them first, like one of the first things I say, do you listen to Retireaholics? Because yeah, there's a lot of crap in the show and there's a lot of fun with it, but it's relevant information. Like you're always one step ahead of like, this is trending, this is coming up, and that's super valuable. And so that's the whole idea with the club in a different kind of format where we're kind of over here in a little group talking about all this stuff and having problems and sharing, and just even there's abundance. There's so much we can all do.
Yeah.
Like we're never going to step on each other's toes. And if we help each other, we can all rise up together. And that's the goal. So
my biggest issue with Retireaholics, and I think it's something that I love most about the club, is Retireaholics were so focused on what's next and who can we bring on that's going to create the discussion that goes beyond what you probably need to win that next plan. Like if you're a part of last night's show, super intriguing about the data collection and what's going to come next for the future of advisor, but is that going to help you win the plan tomorrow? No. And that's always kind of been my pet peeve, which is why I always do the hashtag not your typical advisor. Like, let me tell you about the staircase and let me tell you about safe harbor and tax efficiency, because there are advisors that want to know how to win the next plan, not what I need to be prepared for in 3 years. And I think you do a good job at that. Like the conversation we had today, this should help someone go out and feel comfortable asking that question in their next meeting. Yeah. That's one thing we don't do well. And we know it. We're not trying to be that as the Retireaholics, but that's one thing we don't do well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know it's a different format altogether, but it's really valuable still. And there's an entertainment factor to it that's been missing in our industry. But the whole data thing right now, it's blowing my mind. I spent 3 hours yesterday of just different tech platforms, and every single one, like they're trying to just gather data. Like that's the whole vision is what can they do with data as power? And that makes me a little bit cautious in a lot of ways, because I feel like I'm giving away a lot of information that is not really going to help my clients or me, or, and so.
Well, so here's the scary thing, Jake. And I told you this at the beginning of the call, and I know, oh, you're still recording this. Damn. It's all right. I'll say it anyway.
We can wrap it up.
No, I'll say this, and it's fine because they were comfortable having this on the air last night, even though we didn't really get to it. JD touched on it briefly, but Hero 7, one of their quotes is like, you need to make sure you're getting the right data. They're not going to the plan sponsor for data. They're not going to the advisor for data. They're not going to the record keeper for data. They have engaged a data gathering team that has worked for the government, that once they know the business and the employees underneath that business, they will be coming to you with whether or not they're married, what kind of debt they have, where their kids go to school. Like this is some scary shit, what they're getting their hands on. And they don't need to collect it. Like I got on at the beginning. I'm like, well, yeah, if you need to know that data, you're going to come to the TPA and you're going to ask us for census and participation and testing. It's like, no, we're not. No, we're not. We're beyond that. We're trying to be the Google or the Apple. We have access that's publicly available data. We have miners that are getting, like, people mining, getting that data that now we can accomplish for that advisor what we're setting out to accomplish. That to me is scary, but it's exciting because what do we all need to do? We need to service the average working American. That average working American doesn't necessarily need a 401k, guys. They might need an emergency savings plan. They might need better spend on medical, so they need an HSA. And if we as a community had that information, we could really make an impact on people's lives. So as much as I want to put my tinfoil hat on like JD does, I like it. I like the data play.
Well, yeah, there's a lot there that's going on, and it changes how our perspective or how people perceive advisors, right? You said we're low car salesmen. It's because we're always pushing 401k as like the end all solution for retirement. That is not the case. That's why I keep driving that story of like, it's a tool. And if you use it right, it's awesome, but it's only one of them. You need a lot to get to retirement. So I want to change that as an industry and how we approach our education of what the 401k really is, because the people are always like, the average employee will say, why would I put my money into that investment? Well, you know what I mean? They overlap the term of investment product versus account, and it drives me crazy. So I'm trying to tell more people. Yeah, Matt, what's up?
I have a question for Chad. So Chad, last night you said a lot of compelling stuff right before we went to the after show, and we were talking about value and fees, and Brett was talking about, he was kind of insinuating like we should be mining more revenue out of the firms I work with. And I'm sitting there listening to you guys last night going, you know, my philosophy when I work with groups is to do just that. That way I don't have to run to the next appointment, the next appointment, the next appointment. I would much rather have 10 large groups that I can mine super deep and really get to know people, because then you have rollover business, you have, you know, family planning a business, you have all the other opportunities because they really know you rather than running to the next plan. So here's my question for you, because, you know, in your business, you see it all the time. Your professional opinion, do you see more value in slowing down and maybe doing 5 plans a year, but running them super deep with whatever size plan that is, as opposed to just like, I'm a 401k rep, dude. Line up the 401ks. I'm going to the next one, and I don't care about anything after that. What do you think?
Yes, to directly answer your question, and you heard me say it last night. Here's what I'll position everybody. What are we actually trying to accomplish? We're trying to help the average working American. If we're just going in and setting up the K plan and saying, peace, I'm moving on to the next K plan, nobody's going to be talking to that person about an emergency savings account or paying off their student loans or refinancing the home if that's necessary to cover medical. Like the average person doesn't have a financial advisor, guys. Their only touch to one might be through the 401k. So if we stop at only servicing the 401k, those people aren't going to get what they need. And so if you want to be a 401k only advisor, I'm cool with that. But then you need a wellness platform. You need other levels of partners that you can bring in on this client to help them. The other component, and this is something that sucks about the TPA space in my mind, if you can quantify, if you can get more revenue from one client, then you can streamline your service model to be more effective for that one client instead of running to the next one. You can monetize more, but you need to be doing the right thing. And why I say that sucks about the TPA space is we get asked all the time, and I'll say it right here. It will never happen. But we get asked all the time, when are you guys going to become an advisor? Like, you guys clearly know your shit. You guys could become advisor. You could pillage these plans. You can make way more money if you did that. As a TPA, there's no way for us to make more money by being a compliance-only TPA. We would have to become a record keeper, become an advisor, try to sell products that we're not specialists in. And that's not something we'll ever do. But as an advisor, your clients need those services and they're not getting them anywhere else. So that's where I say the industry and the industry change and the data play is good. Because if advisors are going to start doing 5 plans a year instead of 15, and they're going to spend the time helping the employee with all of these other things, and they can do so in a way that makes their practice profitable still, now we've got a perfect world, in my mind.
Well, on the flip side of that, I'm always feeling like every TPA is trying to help everybody. So they're so custom to the whole marketplace. I would almost love to have my own little mini team that just helps my physician groups, and they're only working for us. Like, because we send a lot of business. I mean, we're sending a lot of business to TPAs, and there's it's a lot of variety because of different reasons. But that to me is the struggle, is everyone's trying to be everything to everybody instead of niching down and knowing that industry itself.
And that makes your life a little hard, right, Jake? Like, my process is different than the next TPAs, and you can depend on one and maybe not one specific part of my process that you can't depend on others. If we embrace technology better than many other TPAs do. So our plan reporting questionnaire that comes out, our census collection, we try to gather it directly from the payroll provider to create some less of a headache for the client. Every TPA is a little different. Every record keeper is a little different. If you spread yourself too thin, it's going to minimize your ability to service your client too. And so, yeah, I agree with both building that big team like we talked about a moment ago, but you also need to be willing to prune. If I'm not living up to what I promised I can for you, you need to stop sending me business. Like, you need to be able to prune the tree and make sure that you continue to have the right team in front of you. And I would disagree. I think other TPAs would also say, I know what we're good at, and that's what we do. You come to me and ask for a 409A or a 125, I'm going to tell you no, even though we could do it. You come and ask me to really govern over an ESOP, I don't really play in the ESOP space, even though I need those dollars or those numbers for calculations of 415 limits. Like, I'm going to tell you what I'm good at, And if you desperately want me to do something else, I might say yes once in a while. But for the most part, I'm going to say, no, look, I've got someone that does this and they're great. You should talk to this TPA.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that answer. Yeah, I'm not planning to add TPA. It's an idea we've been throwing around saying, how do we get better help? Because our clients don't care. They're like, whatever, get this done, right? They don't know our TPAs are necessarily separate until we get the engagement letters all going, but they come to us first and we have the team built. So
the TPA is like that doormat that you have coming into your house from out back. Super important, right? You need to get all the dirt off your feet before you step in the house, but nobody appreciates that doormat. That's the TPA. Like most people don't even know what we do.
That's one of your worst analogies, but it's
that was the best analogy I've ever heard. Chad, I don't think you're a doormat, dude.
Yeah, I don't.
I'm saying the TPA community as a whole, like we've got a responsibility, but nobody knows what we do or how we do it. You just know that you need us and we need to do what's right. We can't screw up because then the client's in a heap of trouble.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've taken way too much time. I appreciate everyone today. Is there any other questions? If there is, I'd probably say just reach out to Chad directly. He's pretty easy to reach most times. I've got him on text, so I like always throwing stuff at him. But we have Shannon and Jeremy and other people to help. So just my recommendation: know your target client, partner with the right TPAs, bring them in the conversation early, and yeah, let's get some deals done. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate y'all. Thanks, Jake.
Thanks, everyone.
Great show.